can go to the next slide. I just want to welcome everybody once again to our Parliamentary Procedures Workshop. This is the first time that we've been doing this, and so we're hoping that it will help some of our newer members conquer this beast that is parliamentary procedure. It is a very confusing topic, and if you've never done it before, this hopefully will show you how. Next slide. Once again, we have a pre-workshop survey, and if you have not filled it out, we would really appreciate it if you filled it out at this time. There will be a post survey. It's only 3 to 4 questions. Should take you less than a minute. It's just really to, see the utility of this workshop. So here's the team that's going to be presenting today. I'm Daniel Lee. I'm the MSS Vice Speaker. I'm an MS3 from the University of South Carolina School of Medicine, Greenville. And I will let the rest of the team introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Maddie Banerjee. I'm a doctor, I guess. Sorry, I just finished my 4th year. So I am now officially a physician. I will be practicing internal medicine at the University of Arizona in Tucson, and I will hand it off to Natasha.
Hey guys, I'm Natasha. I just finished my MS3 year, starting my PhD at McGovern Medical School. And I'm really excited for today. Parli-Pro is something I always found really confusing, and I really hope this helps you guys, and please participate. We're really, again, excited about this.
And I'm Rachel. I just finished my PhD and I'm an MS3 now at Rutgers, New Jersey Medical School up in New Jersey, the best state in the country. And just echoing what Natasha said, Parli-Pro is a lot of fun. So we hope that you enjoy this workshop and also enjoy assembly.
Alrighty. We also have a special guest with us. It's Dr. Lisa Egbert. She is the Vice Speaker of the AMA House of Delegates. Dr. Egbert, if you just want to hop on and say hi, if you have any words of wisdom for our new members, this would be the time.
I don't know about words of wisdom, but I will just say, listen to your lovely speaker and vice speaker. They will help you out in learning this crazy world of parliamentary procedure. I'm just here as one of the trustee liaisons to the medical student section. I don't know if I'll still be assigned to you all next year, but for this upcoming June meeting, you still got me. So I'm here to help out if I can, and encourage you to learn as much as you can and come on up to the big house when you can. So good luck tonight.
Thank you, Dr. Egbert. Right here, another link is just a workshop support document. If you're having any troubles, just use this URL, it'll have some helpful information. And now let's get into the meat. This is just going to be a quick general overview before we get into the real detail-oriented part of the parliamentary procedure. So the role of the AMA and in policy is that we have delegates that pass resolutions. Some of you are probably delegates for your school. Some of you are authors who have probably written resolutions for the MSS. So these resolutions guide the AMA to work with multiple relevant stakeholders, whether it be the national, state, or local government, and all 3 branches, the legislative, executive, and judicial branch. We also work with medical organizations, health systems, and actually individual physicians. And the first thing when we think about writing policy is whether this policy is external or internal. And external resolutions are ones that we send to the AMA House of Delegates. This is where Dr. Egbert, presides over the entire house, and we debate, as physicians, medical students, organized medical staff, the merit of these resolutions and what the AMA should be, advocating for. Internal resolutions, however, are only for the MSS. So they allow the MSS to take a public stance and advocate within the AMA on resolutions related to ones that are in the AMA HOD. So a common scenario is that we pass an MSS resolution internally, and then there's a policy that either we make or that another section in the greater house creates. And we have policy that supports or doesn't support that resolution, and then we can reference that and, make decisions on how we will approach that resolution. And even with internal policy, there is a key thing that we can't actually advocate outside of the AMA about this policy until the greater AMA adopts it. And this is all very important because there are motions, and we can talk about all these different motions a little later, but there are motions that can be made to convert a resolution from external to internal or vice versa. And that's just in the resolve clause where it's like resolved the AMA or the AMA MSS. If it has MSS in it, then it's internal. And if it's just the AMA, then it's external. And so it will go to the House of Delegates once passed. So the reference committee. We're at this stage right now, so the reference committee report will be released soon if it hasn't been already. And we have a couple recommendations. So the main ones you'll see are adopt, adopt as amended, refer for study, not adopt, or reaffirm. Okay, so basically the Refcom takes a look at the resolution as a whole and decides if on the merit. There's a lot of testimony that goes on in the virtual VRC. It's what we call it, the Virtual Reference Committee, where you post on a forum, and it's where delegates, societies, and committees can post on certain resolutions and support or testify against these policies. And then the Refcom takes that all into consideration and then come up with one of these 5 recommendations. And the MSS can choose to agree or disagree with these recommendations. And if you were to disagree with these recommendations, you would then do what we call extraction. And anyone can disagree with the Refcom. And if they can, or if they do, they can extract the resolution. And if the resolution is not extracted, that means the Refcom's recommendation is the default. So if, say we have a recommendation that isn't extracted, and it's adopt. So we will not even debate it on the floor. It will just be adopted because no one wanted to fight the Refcom recommendation. So a one that's a little more nebulous is refer for study. So if you don't know, the AMA MSS has multiple topical student committees, whether that be the Committee on Global or on Public Health, the Committee on Scientific Issues, or the Committee on like Bioethics and Humanities. These standing committees work year-round to evaluate referred resolutions over the next 6 months to a year and provide recommendations via report. Once that report is made, then the MSS votes on these recommendations at a future meeting when the report is available. So this just means, the reference committee says refer to study. So they're not sure about the topic. They think there is some merit, but we don't think, or that the reference committee doesn't think that the resolve clause accurately reflect the data or some other facet of the topic. And so they want these standing committees who are experts to take a look and provide updated recommendations. Another one that's commonly seen is reaffirmation, also just known as reaff. So if a resolution is too similar or covered by existing policy, that's when the reference committee would recommend reaffirmation. It's not indicated on the policy timeline, but it is generally not a desired outcome for your resolution. If it's reaffirmation, that means there's not going to be any additional action taken on it. But if you felt like it was an issue that needs to be taken action on, you could submit a governing council action item, or a GCAI as we call it, and it can speak with MSS leadership for guidance on what we can do. Alrighty, so that was a lot. So we're just going to do a quick survey or pulse check. So if you disagree with Refcom's recommendations, what do you do? And you should see a little poll from Zoom, and you can answer. Alrighty, we can go ahead and close the poll. So the results, 38% of you asked for the resolution to be extracted if reaffirmation, another 31% reach out to the authors and ask them to extract the resolution. And then we had some others. But so if your resolution, if it is your resolution and you want it, and you don't disagree with Refcom, you want to extract this resolution. So if it is reaffirmation, you'll have to extract from the floor and then give testimony as to why you think your resolution is novel. And then there will be a vote taken. If it is not your resolution, it is important to reach out to the authors and inform them that you disagree and plan to extract. However, this is not a, you don't have to do this, we just recommend it just because it keeps the floor cordial, and some people need that extra heads up, and y'all can discuss in the background. But you can extract without anyone's permission. So, all right, next pulse check. Which of these is not a Refcom recommendation? Oh yeah, you guys look like y'all know this one. All right, we can go ahead and close the poll. Alrighty, so yes, tabling the resolution is not a Refcom recommendation. That is a motion that can be made on the floor when we are debating policy. And we'll get more into what table the resolution means and other motions that you can do after a resolution is extracted. All right. So this is just a nice slide that helps you really decide whether or not you want to extract. So if you agree with the Refcom recommendation, then you do not extract, obviously. But if you don't agree with the recommendation, then you would extract, you would testify against the recommendation in support or against of what your original ask was. And then you can offer an amendment that addresses the concern of Refcom. You could also refer for study. These are all options after you get that extraction. So basically, if you want to extract, then, or if you want to do something with that resolution, then you have to extract it. All right, so contesting and testifying. So while the process is smooth sailing when everyone supports a policy, disagreement is normal. There is heated debate, but we always try to keep it cordial and professional on the floor. But it is important to have your opinion heard. Don't feel bad in voicing your thoughts and concerns. Everyone should be heard, and that's really what parliamentary procedure is about, is making sure that everyone is heard and that the will of the entire assembly is followed. So like I was saying earlier, the first round of testimony is on the virtual reference committee, and this is what's taken into consideration by Refcom before they make their recommendations. And they are not the ultimate authority. Like we said, we can extract after the Refcom report is released at the meeting if you do not agree with their recommendations. So when you extract, it is customary for the primary or the secondary author, whoever is able to speak to that matter, to speak first. When you extract, you want to give the reasoning why, and then have them go from there. And if you have a resolution with multiple supporters on the VRC, coordinate with them to discuss who will speak on which points. Some people have more, passion about points or more information on certain points and topics. And if you feel like they would add to your argument, then you would definitely want to talk to them and include them in your debate. The next slide. All right, pulse check. If passed, what part of the resolution becomes policy? Awesome. We can go ahead and close the poll. So yeah, most of you got it right. The resolve clause is the one that becomes policy. So none of the whereases are part of the policy. It just is the background information and all the data that you created if you're the author that supports why this resolve clause should be policy. So when you see it on the website in our policy finder, it won't show all of the data that was researched and all the whereas clauses. It only show the resolve clauses. Alrighty, I'm going to hand it off to Dr. Maddie Banerjee for an overview of parliamentary procedure.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Daniel. So, I mean, as Daniel kind of said at the beginning, Parli-Pro is definitely a beast. You know, it takes a little bit of time and a little bit of practice, but that's why you're all here. So we're super excited to kind of give you like the details and the nitty gritty. But if you find yourself stumbling at the real meeting, it's totally okay and natural and fine. Like we've all been there. We all did the same thing. Just know that you're like amongst peers, and the whole purpose of this is to get better so that by the time you're ready to hit the HOD, you know what you're doing and you sound like a pro. So for those of you who are kind of familiar with Parli-Pro, you know, out of order kind of means that you're either speaking out of turn or you're speaking on a motion that has precedent that is lower than the current motion or the main motion on the floor. So our goal of this session is to make you more of a Parli-Pro genius as opposed to somebody who's going to be speaking out of order. So at the end of the day, there are two main principles of parliamentary procedure. The first one being that we only answer one question at a time. So what that means is anytime there is a motion on the floor, that's what you're giving testimony on. You don't speak to things that were discussed before. You don't try to jump the gun and go on something that's ahead if it's out of order as far as precedence is concerned. You're only giving testimony and speaking to the main motion on the floor. And kind of like what I alluded to earlier, each type of question is given a priority, which is basically like the urgency of which it can be answered immediately. And when you're out of order, it's because you did something or tried to propose something of lower priority than whatever the main motion on the floor is. So this pyramid kind of shows you what the order or that order of precedence is for most of the main motions. Take a look at it, definitely like take a picture. We also have like in our resources, different variations of this that you can utilize and just keep next to your laptop during the meeting itself, which will really help you out a lot. I know I definitely used it my first couple of meetings until I kind of became more familiar. But it kind of just shows you. So for example, a main motion is at the bottom and anything above it means that it has precedence over the main motion. And therefore you could make a motion one of those things and it would be okay. So say for example, there's a main motion on the floor and you want to amend the language. That's totally fine because an amendment is above you know, the main motion in order. But say for example, you know, there's a motion on the floor currently to refer a resolution for study. And then someone comes up and they're like, well, I want to make an amendment. Well, that would technically be out of order because as you can see based on this pyramid, the amend step is below refer. And at the end of the day, the reason that we really use parliamentary procedure is to keep everything fair and equitable within our section. We want equality of rights. The majority group of the assembly should be the ones making the decision, but the minority should also have rights and such that they are able to say their piece and give their viewpoint so that it's not just them getting steamrolled. Like Daniel alluded to earlier, there's always the right to discussion and debate. That's really what we come here for. That's really why I personally love our section is there's always lively debate and discussion and you get to hear so many different thoughts and viewpoints, which I think is really integral to growing not only as an individual, but as a section. The right to information, if you're ever confused, don't know what's going on, you do have the ability to step up and say, hey, like, I don't understand, and we will take care of you. We will get it figured out for you. And then at the end of the day, everything should be in fairness and good faith. The reason that we have these rules is so that we're, like I said, making sure that everything is fair across the board and everyone has the opportunity to say their piece. And we as an assembly can come together and make decisions to represent ourselves outwardly within the AMA as a whole. So just briefly, let's talk about some of the requests that you can make or motions that you can make when you're, coming up to the mic. I guess in a virtual setting, you don't come up to the mic. We'll get to that later. But But there are some requests that can be used basically at any time during discussion during the assembly, and there is no second required. You know, if you've gone to a meeting or participated in a meeting before, oftentimes you'll see the speakers asking for a second anytime a motion is made. Well, here are some examples of things that you don't need to make a second for. One is parliamentary inquiry, which is basically like, hey, I don't really understand what's going on from a parliamentary procedure standpoint, and I would like some clarity on it. You can have a point of order where if for whatever reason Daniel or I were to make an error and do something out of order or not follow that pyramid appropriately, you could come up and say, you know, point of order, I believe that we were actually, you know, talking about a refer to study and therefore amendment is out of order. Division. We usually don't do division of assembly in our virtual settings. When we were having our meetings in person, you know, we vote saying ayes or nays, and so it's a verbal vote, right? And it's up to the speaker's discretion to decide which one was the majority in that case. So when we do return to in-person meetings, if for whatever reason you're like, no, I think that the speaker called that vote wrong, you can ask for division, which then means that everyone would raise their placards. And I believe it's our rules committee would actually go around and count votes and see which side actually numerically won that vote. There's also division of a question. So anytime a resolution has multiple portions, you can divide it so that each thing can be considered separately. It doesn't have to be considered as a whole. As far as voting is concerned, in general, we use the majority vote pass most motions. However, there are some specific circumstances where we need a 2/3 majority vote in order for something to pass. And I'll get into more detail with that in future slides. And then as far as interrupting, I mean, it's a little bit more difficult in the virtual setting because we actually have a queue where we can see you come up to the mic. But there are certain motions that technically are permissible for interruption of the assembly. One is to withdraw a motion. So say, for example, you said something and you're like, oh crap, like that is not what I meant to say. I would like to withdraw that. Like, I realize that I did it wrong. You can come up to the mic and make a motion to withdraw like your previous motion. There can also be reconsideration of a motion that happened prior to whatever was occurring presently. You can appeal the decision of a chair, and you can use, like I said, any of the requests that I discussed previously. That's something that can be, doesn't have to be in order of that pyramid that I showed you earlier. So let's talk a little bit about main motions. Like I said previously, whatever the main motion is, that's like what we are discussing at the moment on the floor. And that's the only thing that you should be giving testimony on, unless you intend to make a motion of higher order or higher precedence, right? So once this main motion has been presented to the assembly, that's what we're debating, that's what we're voting, and that's it. Now, like I said, with the pyramid, you can do other things. You can amend, you can reconsider, which is not something that we typically do, but if there was something that happened at a previous meeting and you want to, you can do that as well. We kind of already talked about consideration. It talks about tabled here, and we'll talk about the difference between postponing and tabling a little bit later, but just keep that in your mind because that's often a sticking point for some people who are newer to parliamentary procedure. Aside from the main motion, we also have subsidiary motions, which are basically something that has been applied to the main motion. It requires a second, unlike some of those requests that we discussed earlier, and you can't interrupt debate in order to make a subsidiary motion on the main motion. A subsidiary motion would be things like amend, refer. Those are all the things that are in the pyramid. So you have to really pay attention to the rank order and the precedence of that pyramid and use that to ensure that you're not going to be out of order. So for example, one of the subsidiary motions you can make is amend. Basically, it's pretty much what the word means. You want to change the language of the resolution or of the resolved clause that is being presented. There's a couple different ways you can do that. So you can delete or strike out, you can insert new language, you can substitute something, or you can do a combination. Some other subsidiary motions would be refer, which we kind of discussed earlier. Usually this is refer to study. It goes to a specific committee within the medical student section if it's an internal policy, usually one that has the most knowledge or would be most proficient in that topic area. You can postpone to a certain time, which basically means, like, say for example, you know, the author wants to confer with certain people about making amendment to the language of their resolved clauses, but they haven't had the opportunity or the time to do that yet. You could make a motion to postpone all discussion and debate on said resolution until, I don't know, an hour from now, or until the author and interested stakeholders have had time to discuss it further. That's totally fine. You can do that. Just be careful with postponing versus tabling. If you just say table a resolution and never, like, don't have any like stipulations on it, table really just means that we're putting it on the table, and if nobody brings it back up again, it's basically gone once the meeting is over. So just be careful with the words that you choose, and if you ever have any question or like are unsure, you know, you can ask our parliamentary pros, Natasha and Rachel, who are part of the Parli-Pro committee. You can reach out to our speakers. We'll take care of you. We'll help you figure it out. Another thing you could do is limit or extend debate time. This is something that does require a 2/3 vote of majority in order to pass. So say, for example, people are spending way too long on a resolution. They're going over the 2 minutes, or we've been discussing the same resolution for, I don't know, an hour. You could make a motion to limit debate time to 1 minute per speaker. Close the debate or call the question. So that basically ends all testimony on the resolved clauses at hand, and it makes us go to an immediate vote. It does require a second and a 2/3 majority because you're basically squelching the voice of the assembly at that point. Now, that being said, there are times when it is appropriate to call the question. So, for example, if both sides in opposition and in favor of have been heard ad nauseum, that would be an appropriate time to call the question. However, let's say, you know, only one person spoke in favor and one person spoke in opposition, and you tried to call the question. It's not exactly the nicest thing to do. It probably wouldn't pass because, like I said at the beginning, one of the basic principles of parliamentary procedure is we want to make sure that both the majority and minority have rights and their voices are heard, and you would kind of be hindering that by doing a call to question prematurely. And then postpone temporarily. I would recommend postponing to a specific time if possible, because things can get lost and things can be forgotten. Of course, you can always come back up to the mic and bring it up, but proceed with caution with postponing and tabling. So how exactly does Parli-Pro fit into the flow of our assembly? Just for a quick reference, feel free to copy these down. We'll also be sending out the PowerPoint to y'all afterwards. So you'll have all of these URLs and links to utilize, you know, in the days leading up to the meeting and during the meeting itself. But here are some cheat sheets that you can use that'll kind of help you out with the really basic details of parliamentary procedure to make sure that you're speaking in order and saying things in the correct manner. So how do you extract a resolution? It's a little bit different in the virtual setting compared to how we do it IRL. So I just want to briefly touch upon this. So as Daniel said earlier, if you disagree with the reference committee or Refcom's recommendation, you are more than welcome to extract that item, whether it be a resolution or a report. When you do that, you're basically removing it from the consent calendar. The consent calendar being basically everything that Refcom said that we are just going to take as they have written unless someone has issue with something. Because we're in the virtual setting, we've been doing our extractions via Google Forms. There's a bit.ly here for that Google form so that you are able to extract. It is not live yet. It won't go live until Refcom has produced and released their report. But once that happens, you are more than welcome to use this form to extract. It'll go through our section delegates, Pauline and Justin. And there is a deadline for extraction of May 29th at 11:59 p.m. Central. That is a hard deadline. If you want to extract after that, if you try to reach out to Pauline and Justin, unfortunately, they will not be able to assist you in that. Once it's done, it is done. Below here, you can see just a little snippet of part of the Google form that is utilized for extraction. There's other information that they take from you, such as, are you the author? What region are you from? But I think this is the most important point of the extraction process, is why are you extracting the item? It's really important to be able to articulate, are you planning to amend the language? Is it because, Refcom actually amended the language in their report and you disagree with it and you would rather support the original language that the authors had put forward? So just make sure that if you do decide to extract, that you are able to clearly state why and give some explanation so that it can be shared with the authors. So if an item is extracted and it was on the reaffirmation calendar, basically if Refcom said we are going to reaff this, there has to be a 1/3 vote of approval in order for discussion and debate on it to continue. You will be able to give a minute of testimony to speak to why you don't think that this should be reaff and why it needs to be extracted. But note that when it's on the reaff calendar, it's a little bit different than some of our other resolutions and Refcom recommendations. It will need a 1/3 vote. Some other reasons you might want to extract is, like I said previously, if you want to amend the language, if you want to revert to original language that the authors had put forward in the resolution, or if you just want to oppose whatever Refcom has said. Say Refcom says that they wanted to adopt the language as is, but for whatever reason, you don't think that we should be adopting that language either as internal or external policy. You are more than welcome to extract. So although Refcom does a really good job and they work very hard and oftentimes their recommendations are on point, it is up to the Assembly and at the will of the Assembly to be able to extract, and that's totally within your rights to do. And that's why we all come to these meetings, is to hear what everyone has to say. So pulse check, and this is a free response, so feel free to either unmute yourself and say it out loud or toss it in the chat. But what are some of the components to giving testimony? Does anyone know? And while you're thinking about the answer to that question, you can see that when we get to be in person, here are some pictures of some of our section members actually giving testimony at a real life mic as opposed to just speaking into the microphone at their laptop. For this virtual meeting, we will be using Zoom and its affiliated platform, Lumi, which will kind of help us to navigate this in a virtual setting. There will be some training for our section actually this time around. Our lovely AMA staff is working on coordinating that for us, and we will get that information to you whenever that becomes available. I'm still waiting, guys. No one's told me. What are the components of testimony? Like, what do you say when you go up to the mic to give testimony? Anything come to mind? Perfect. Yes, I see introductions, speaking on behalf of, speaking in favor / opposition. Hit the nail on the head. That's exactly what I was looking for. So how do you introduce yourself during assembly? Wait to be acknowledged by the speaker. That's obviously number one. You're not allowed to just come up to the mic and speak. Keep this in mind for when you're in person. Like I said, it doesn't happen as often virtually because we actually are the ones who have the ability to unmute you. But when you are in person, there are times when your members will go up and just start speaking at the mic. Please don't do that. Wait for your speaker or vice speaker to acknowledge you first. And then you go ahead and you state your name. If you are holding a specific position and you are speaking from that position, it's oftentimes great to go ahead and announce that, where you're coming from, and then who you're speaking on behalf of and what position you're holding. After that, you give justification or testimony as to why you're taking that position, and you kind of end it like a sandwich. You say, in conclusion, that is why I am speaking in support. So I'll give you a quick example. So I would say, Maddie Banerjee, obviously I wouldn't say speaker, but let's say back in the day, I would say Maddie Banerjee, delegate from University of Arizona College of Medicine, Tucson, speaking on behalf of Region 1 in support of the resolution because X, Y, and Z being my justification, and then closing my testimony by saying, as such, I am speaking in support of this resolution. So if anyone feels comfortable, I would love to hear someone give it a try right now. You don't have to give any particulars as far as the justification, but if someone would feel brave enough to go ahead and unmute themselves and kind of give it a try, I would love to hear it. And if not, I'm going to get to pick on someone. So if you want to save the rest of the group, this is your time to shine.
I'll save us. So I can actually say what I said at my last state meeting, because I actually have it pulled up here. So Ramel Morales, main author, speaking on behalf of the MSS in support of Resolution X. I'd like to thank the speaker chair and the committee today for the pleasure of the virtual podium. I can keep going if you want. Okay. The primary intention of our resolution was to promote the value and infrastructure of this said committee as a sustainable model for addressing health disparities, especially among minoritized, marginalized, and vulnerable demographics. And this was precipitated by XYZ. So in light of this and recognition of concerns brought up through the commenting forum, we are offering an amendment to congruent to this particular doctor's suggestion. And so therefore we offered that the resolved on page X be amended to read that blah, blah, blah. We do not think that this should be referred to council, as we believe that timely action will drive needed momentum. Thank you. I yield the rest of my time.
Perfect. So that's a little bit more advanced, but yes, you can say yield the rest of your time, which is basically saying that you haven't utilized the whole 2 minutes and that you're basically giving it back to the assembly. So thank you so much, Ronald, for doing that. You did a fantastic job. Great audience participation. And yes, thank you for being the hero and saving everyone else. So here's a sample testimony. Honestly, I don't think that we need to spend too much time on it because Ronald did such a good job. But like I said earlier, your name, where you're from, if you're speaking on behalf of a certain committee, or if you're speaking on behalf of your state, school, your region, you would put that at the top. And then make sure at the end that you're just reiterating what it is that you're saying. Sometimes testimony can get a little lengthy. And just to help your speakers and the rest of the assembly out, reiterating your stance will make things run a lot more smoothly and avoid complication. So what to know when you're debating a motion. Authors should be speaking first whenever we bring a new resolution to the floor. Make sure you're always introducing yourself. Say, I move to. A lot of times newer members will say, I motion. Although we understand what you mean, and that's totally fine if you do say that. The more appropriate vernacular would be, I move to. As I said previously, the majority of motions would require a second, and when we're in the virtual setting, that will be done by simply raising your hand. It's going to look kind of like this. It's similar to what you see on Zoom to raise your hand, so that's how we'll be doing it during the meeting itself. And then go ahead and give your argument. We'll usually put a 2-minute time limit on it unless there has been a motion to limit debate time. And in that case, that's the time limit that we will be utilizing instead. So primary motions, we kind of talked about this previously, but just to reiterate, you can make a motion to adopt something as written or not adopt, an amendment, which we already talked about previously, a secondary amendment, which means that the main motion on the floor is an amendment, but you want to change something on top of that. It's important to keep in mind that when a secondary amendment is made, we are no longer discussing that first primary amendment. All discussion and testimony is only on the secondary amendment. This little side note is super important too. Please make sure that you provide any amended language to the logistics committee prior to actually giving testimony during the meeting. So that means that if you already extracted something before the meeting, you already know that you plan to amend, please provide that language to logistics, and we will be giving you their email further down in this presentation. I'm not going to go through the rest of these just for the sake of time and the fact that we've already discussed it, but like I said, we will be setting up this PowerPoint, so feel free to take a look and delve deeper into it on your own. So a quick pulse check. What happens if something is referred to study? So are students in selected standing committees writing a report and a recommendation? Does AMA conduct a study? Does AMA staff do a study? Does the AMA urge research communities to study the issue, or are authors who wrote the initial resolution encouraged to study the issue more? I'll give you a few more seconds. Okay, we can go ahead and close the poll. So the majority of you did get it right. Usually student members of a standing committee are the ones who will write a report and then bring it back, typically at the next meeting or 2 meetings afterwards, and then give a recommendation on the policy at hand. There were some people that said that AMA conducts a study on the issue. You know, technically, if it was an external policy, you know, it could be a council, like an AMA council that conducts the study. But in general, when it's an internal MSS policy, it is students within our standing committee who are doing the research and writing the report. So how do you end debate? So you could call the question, like I said previously, make sure that you're doing it at the appropriate time. You're not doing it too prematurely. But once that happens, either myself or Daniel will say, you know, the current motion on the floor is to adopt this resolution as written. Please cast your votes in favor or opposition at this time. If you are a delegate or an alternate delegate for your school's chapter, you are eligible to vote, although please note that only one of you is able to vote at a time. So you'll do that via the virtual platform, and we will then announce the voting numbers to show you what the majority is, and either the motion will carry forward or the motion will fail. If you do want to move things along, we kind of already talked about the difference between table and postponing. Basically, that's putting it on the shelf and dealing with it later. Postponing is ending it or bringing it back at a specific time. Tabling can be a little bit more vague and wishy-washy. We talked about limiting debate. You can motion to end debate or call the question. Recess, which is not typically something that we've had to use in the virtual setting, because anyways, you can turn your video off and take a break as long as it's not something of importance to you. And we typically also don't do adjourn because people are so riled up and ready to go and talk about business during assembly that they want to keep going as long as possible. So order of precedence, I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide just because it's similar to the pyramid. But like I said, make sure that you understand the order of precedence. The things at the bottom are of the lowest precedence, things above them are higher. And the things on the right are things that don't really have an order of precedence and therefore can be done or motioned for at any time. So say, for example, you want to, I guess what's the best way to phrase this? If you're uncomfortable with something in the environment, which again, doesn't usually happen virtually, but in person, which fingers crossed we'll be able to do soon, you would do a point of personal privilege. So for example, point of personal privilege, there's too much chitter chatter in the background. I'm unable to hear the people who are giving testimony at the mic. Can we please keep it down? That would be a point of personal privilege. Point of order is something that I already stated previously. If somebody is not doing something in the right time, according to parliamentary procedure, point of order is in order. Point of information, if you need more information on something that's being discussed, like say, for example, you're like, point of information, I thought there was already a study done on this 2 years ago. If somebody, you know, CME, our Council on Medical Education, could come speak to this, that would be a time that you would use point of information. And then point of parliamentary inquiry. Again, like I said, if you're ever confused, your speakers are more than happy to help you at the mic. We also have our lovely Parli-Pro committee who will be hosting a GroupMe chat during the meeting that you can ask any questions to. So quick pulse check. If you want to ask a question to speakers about the resolution content, how would you do that during the assembly? And you'll note that we put the options as type/say, because in the virtual format, when you are approaching the mic virtually, you will be typing what your intent is. So that way we can see it ahead of time and then give you the access to unmute your mic. All right, we can go ahead and close the poll. So pretty split half and half, point of inquiry versus point of information. Like I said, it's going to take some practice, and that's totally fine. That's why we have the cheat sheets for you. So if you have a question about the content of the resolution, that's point of information. If you had a question about something parliamentary, that would be a point of inquiry. So like I said, definitely use those cheat sheets. They will be your BFF during the meeting and hopefully in future meetings until you've got it down pat. All right, so in general, most motions are okay to pass with a majority vote. This is something that I stated earlier. I think the easiest way for y'all to remember it, especially in the earlier stages, is just to focus on the ones that need a 2/3 vote. And in the back of your mind, you can think that pretty much everything else will need a majority vote unless it's one of those requests that doesn't really need a vote or a second at all. So the things that require a 2/3 vote include suspending debate, ending debate, limiting or extending time on debate, and suspending the rules. That's because these motions in particular really will infringe or expand on the rights in a substantial way. So we have to make sure that the majority of, not the majority, but a great majority, a 2/3 majority of the assembly is on board with that and comfortable with proceeding in that manner. So another pulse check. Which of these motions cannot be made? Motion to refer to study during discussion of an amendment, motion to propose a secondary amendment to an amendment, motion to vote on an amendment while people are still queued for testimony, which was kind of hard to see in the virtual setting, a motion to separate a multi-part amendment or motion to withdraw, or a motion to limit or extend debate time. If you need to pull up your little cheat sheet or your pyramid to help yourself out, all right, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. So this was actually a trick question. I apologize in advance. I guess not in advance, after the fact. But this is a trick question. All of these are fine. You can do it. These are good. If you kind of refer to the little box in the corner, you'll see that everything that was proposed here, the amendments were a higher order of precedence, so they would have been fine. So like I said, it's just going to take a little bit of practice. And even if you do have a little hiccup here or there, it's no big deal. We have all been there. So how do you keep track of everything that's going on? There's a lot of amendments. People are proposing things. You're like, what's the motion on the floor? This is where our logistics committee comes in. They basically have this public Google Drive that has all of the relevant documents available that we are debating. And while we are in the meeting, they actually project on the screen the language of the current resolved clauses, and they're also updating it. So say, for example, you made an amendment to a resolved clause, they would in real time type it out, or hopefully you would have, no, not hopefully, definitely you would have already sent it to them. They would be able to go ahead and project that amended language. And this is kind of why it's so important to provide them with the amended language ahead of time, because if not, it really just slows everything down and prolongs our process, making us unable to spend an appropriate amount of time on other resolutions as well. So as you can see here, we've given you the email for logistics. Feel free to write it down, take note of it. Make sure that you send them any amended language. And if you have any questions about the resources available, feel free to email them. The chair is Whitney Stewart. She's fabulous. She headed the logistics committee at our last meeting, and she'll definitely take care of you and help you out with whatever you need. So what do you need for the conference? Here's a list of things that we will have a Google folder set up. By the time we get to the meeting, it's going to have all of these things, including the handbook, Refcom report, all of these Parli-Pro cheat sheets. And yes, a positive attitude in your favorite drink or snack, because we all need a little brain power when we're doing all this business. But pretty much you should be set with everything that's going to be in the Google Drive. If you have anything else that you need, like I said, reach out to logistics, reach out to myself and Daniel, Natasha, Rachel, we're here to help. I am now going to hand it over to Rijal, who will go through some examples for us along with Natasha.
Thank you, Dr. Madam Speaker. So again, my name is Rijal. We're just going to quickly run through a couple examples in this big group, and then we will probably break up into smaller groups and work on another example or two. So we'll start with the first one, which is actually a fake resolution. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the resolution, oh, one back, please. Thank you. So the resolution is as appears on the screen. Like we said earlier, the whereas clauses are not really up for debate with resolutions. That when they come to the floor, we're really just looking at the resolve language, but we have it there just so you can see. How the process will work is the speakers will read the title of the resolution and the resolved clause, and then will state what the reference committee's recommendation is. In this case, the resolved clause, like I said, is on the screen. The reference committee recommended refer for study, which if you remember, is just sending it to a standing committee for study. After they do that, the chair of the reference committee will come up and will provide their rationale for why they're referring it to study. So again, I'm not going to read through this, but this is the rationale that they have. And they will always end their statement by saying, for these reasons, your reference committee recommends resolution 1 be whatever, whether it's referred, adopted as amended, etc. So as it stands, this example resolution is being recommended for referral. And here's the language of the resolve clause again. So let's say you did not want to refer the resolution. Let's say you disagreed with the reference committee's recommendation. What would the first step be in the process? Participation is highly encouraged. You can just call it out. I will call on someone. We'll start with us. So Natasha, what would the first step be?
You're going to want to extract it.
Well done. You will extract it. So this was not a reaffirmation, so you don't have to worry about a 1/3 vote. If you want to extract it, it'll be extracted. Like we said, it'll be through a virtual process. Once it's extracted, then it comes to the floor with the reference committee's recommendation. So again, the recommendation is still refer to study or refer to committee. What would you do next? If you disagree with the recommendation?
We have to vote down referral.
Thank you. Yes, you're going to vote down the referral. So you'll come to the microphone, you'll introduce yourself like we said, and you'll just vote down the referral. Again, assuming that that vote passes, what'll happen is you'll revert to the original language as is displayed on the screen, and that'll be the main motion that's being discussed. So let's say you wanted to make an amendment to it. So I won't ask for participation here, but all you would do is essentially go to the virtual microphone and you will say that you want to make what's called a first order amendment. And it's first order because it's the first thing that's amending what's on the screen. Here you can see the first order amendment. Logistics will use kind of this red text during the meeting and then blue text for the second order amendments, just so you can see it easily. But here's your first order amendment. So now here you have a couple options. Here, one thing you can do is just, we can vote to vote on this language and take it in, or we can propose a second order amendment. So in this example, we have the second order amendment and it's in the blue. So again, look for the colors. Logistics will make it very clear during the meeting. Now what's being discussed is the second order amendment. So as the pyramid showed earlier, and as Maddie talked about earlier, you need to vote essentially on what's being discussed. So because there's a second order amendment on the table, you're not going to look at the first order amendment right now. You're going to vote on whether or not to include the second order amendment. So once we vote, so saying it's approved, then it would be included into what's being discussed. And then we'll go back to the first the first order amendment. I am actually hearing a point of order from our vice speaker. Would you like to say something, Mr. Vice Speaker?
Yes, a point of order. This is not a second order amendment. A second order amendment only changes the first order amendment.
Thank you. That is in order. So this is not great, this is a good example for what, not to do with the second order amendment. So you would not actually be able to propose what's in blue. A good second order amendment as an example for this would be, changing text messaging to instant messaging, which, like, who says that these days? I don't know, but it could be proposed. But we can just go to the next slide just to go through this. Perfect. So let's say that went in. We're back to the first order amendment. Again, you just vote on this amendment first to whether or not to include it. Let's say we vote to include it, we can go to the next slide. And then we're back to the main motion, which is, whether or not to adopt this into our policy now that it's been amended. So the last vote you would do here is just to vote whether or not to adopt it. And that's our fake example. I hope that makes sense. Now I'm going to run through a real example really quickly. So this resolution came about last year. It's entitled Support for the Use of Psychiatric Advance Directives. So here is a brief whereas, just explaining what a psychiatric advance directive is. Again, the whereas clauses are not going to be up for debate when you're on the floor, but just so you know, we can go to the next slide. So here are the resolve clauses. So there are two. The first is that our AMA will support efforts to increase awareness and appropriate utilization of psychiatric advance directives. And we have further resolved that our AMA will support the education of medical students and residents on psychiatric advance directives. So the first thing we notice here is that this is an external resolution. It's about the AMA doing it as opposed to the AMA MSS. So at some point in the future of this resolution, should it pass, it will go to the House of Delegates. Go to the next slide. So here's the reference committee's recommendation. And this is usually what you'll see. They tend to be a little complex. So there are three parts to the reference committee's recommendation. The first is an amendment to the first resolve clause, which is syntax-based. I will say, as a piece of advice, the reference committee will make changes to syntax and to grammar in their recommendations. When you're on the floor, don't worry about that too much. Any resolve that's passed will go through some post-processing. So if there's like a spelling error, don't feel the need to make an amendment for that. Like, that will be corrected at some point in the future. So that's our first recommendation. The second one is to delete the second resolve clause. The rationale behind this is that the first resolve clause provides enough for you to do the second resolve clause, and there's also prior policy that makes this a little redundant. And the last part of every reference committee's recommendation will always be, just summarizing their final recommendation. So we can go to the next slide. Perfect. And this is just, some rationale as to why they recommended reaffirmation. So the original second resolve clause is at the top. You can see the highlighted portion kind of talks about why it might be redundant, which again is up to the discretion of the assembly, but that was their decision. Next slide, please. Okay, so now what? So like we said, Refcom recommended adopt as amended as shown on the screen. So you have a couple of options. If you agree with the reference committee's recommendation, you can do absolutely nothing. And this resolution will pass and we'll all be happy as is. If you disagree with it, like we said, you can extract it. One piece of advice I would give everyone is, if you're extracting something, you're bringing it out of the consent calendar onto the floor. If for some reason we don't get to that item when we're doing our assembly, it kind of goes away forever. So really think about your extractions and be thoughtful about them, because it's fun to debate everything, but at the same time, you don't want to take something out for something minor and then have it kind of go back into the abyss. Yeah, next slide, please. So there you go. Those are the options. And there we go. So in this case, the resolution was not extracted and the reference committee's recommendation was passed. So this never came to the floor and it was just voted on at the end when we voted in our consent calendar. So like I said earlier, this is an external resolution. So once it passed on the MSS floor, then it went to the House of Delegates. So the typical timeline is that if something passes at, a June MSS meeting, it'll go to the following House of Delegates meeting, so the one in November. So, what happened here is it went to the House of Delegates meeting. It was debated on the floor. It was referred, which we talked about a little earlier. And it was referred to a council and at the big AMA, and they're going to be putting a report together. Okay, so the next one is Natasha will be going over. I believe she's reconnecting because, technology sucks. But I'll go ahead and start us off. So it's the title for the resolution is Support for Assisted Outpatient Treatment. Here's a brief definition of it. It's a psychiatric thing. And we can go to this is the resolved clause. So there it's resolved that our AMA support the use of assisted outpatient treatment as a method of intervention for individuals with serious mental illness at the state and local level in the United States. Okay, so this is just an example of what testimony looks like on the virtual reference committee, which Daniel talked about earlier. So you'll see the HCC or the House Coordination Committee. They're a pretty large committee within the MSS, and they kind of review all the resolutions that come through and determine how novel they are. So here you can see, the House Coordination Committee essentially said this is not reaffirmation, which means it's pretty novel. And then each kind of entity within the MSS, including individuals, are welcome to give testimony, in support or against it on the virtual reference committee. So we have some committees here, we have a region here, et cetera, et cetera. You can go to the next slide. Again, some more examples of things. We have some state societies that comment, and then we also have, authors tend to comment as well in the VRC and essentially respond to feedback that they got, but also propose some amendments. An amendment that's proposed by the authors in the VRC is not automatically considered in the resolution. It's just something they're proposing to include. The reference committee is able to include that amendment if they see fit. And finally, our section delegates will also often comment on the VRC with their expert opinion as well. We can see here they recommended a referral for study. Okay, so this was the reference committee's recommendation. Like we said, the flow of business will be the speakers will introduce a resolution, the reference committee will give their rationale, and this is their rationale. It's there to be read, but essentially it's a not adopt. So, Natasha, you're back. Would you like to take over?
I can try. You may have to jump back in for me. I don't know why my internet's so bad. But yeah, so here we are. And like Ridgel said, the Refcom recommendation was not adopt. So what do we want to do? We can move to the next piece. So if we do nothing, like we've talked about, the outcome will be what Refcom recommends, not adopt. And if we extract, then the resolution will come to the floor and and we can debate it. So in this case, do we want to extract this resolution? Anyone want to give me a thumbs up, thumbs down? We have our little reactions. You don't have to talk. Well, let's say yes, thank you. All right, we're going to extract. So we'll go to the next. Okay, So since the last one wasn't extracted, we're going to go over quickly kind of what happens when it's extracted. I know we've talked about it a lot, but we're just going to zoom through it one more time. So anything that's not on the reaffirmation calendar can automatically be extracted. So since this isn't reaff, we can extract it. If it is on reaff, we need the 1/3 of the vote, 1/3 vote. And then other than that, non-extractions, we talked about that. They're just going to be what Refcom recommends. So what's going to happen in the actual assembly is when they get to the item number, once we're done with all the pre-work, the speaker is going to introduce the recommendation. Refcom is going to read their recommendation. Our resolution speakers are going to introduce the resolution. Refcom is going to read their recommendation, and then they're going to ask for testimony for or against. And as we talked about, the authors get to talk first, and then the extracting party, if it's not the authors, should talk as well to explain why they extracted. And then we debate. So here, this is a practice one. I really want some participation. Be prepared. Okay, so just this is kind of a brief overview of what's going to happen in this one. We're going to have testimony for a few different people, the authors, the Committee on Bioethics and Humanities, Region 3, the section delegates. These are all the options. If you have your page open, the cheat sheet that we gave you, that's going to be really helpful too. Okay, next slide. Okay, and I have the pyramid there too, so you guys know what to do. But this one, we're kind of going to walk through it in what a kind of example of what could have happened. That's pretty close to what actually happened. So Refcom recommended not adopt. So the main motion on the floor right now is not adopt, right? So does anyone want to practice giving testimony? We had a great testimony earlier. Anyone new want to just give testimony? All you have to say is just, we support this resolution. You don't have to give a whole great reason why. If not, I'm going to call on someone. I want someone new. Ariane, can you give testimony for us?
Sure. Okay, my name is Ariane Felicitas. I am a, so what would we say if we're just like a member, like not an author or anything?
Speaking on behalf of yourself.
Speaking on behalf of myself from Texas College of Osteopathic Medicine in support of this resolution because I agree with it.
Perfect, and that can be done. Yeah, so if you're not anything, you just really feel strongly about it, again, you can just say, from the school, speaking on behalf of myself. If you are an author, whether you're a primary author or a secondary author, you can speak on behalf of the authors. And sometimes during strategizing too, you might say, okay, even if you're an author, you might say, okay, I'm this author, I'm going to talk on behalf of the authors, but this other author, you're going to talk on behalf of Region 3. But thank you so much, I appreciate it, being the first person I called on. All right, you want to move on to the next one? Does anyone want to give testimony for the Committee on Bioethics and Humanities? I'm going to go down the list otherwise. Maria, can you give testimony? Are you on? Again, it doesn't have to be anything special. Just introduce yourself and say, we disagree. Milan? No worries, thank you. Okay, Trisha, Sarah. Daniel, can you give testimony for CBH?
Yep. This is Daniel Lee speaking on behalf of CBH in, hold on, in support of Refcom's recommendation for not adoption because we agree with Refcom and we don't agree with the authors.
Perfect. Thank you, Daniel. All right, one more chance. Anyone else you can see? It's super easy. Kunal?
Yeah, sure, I'll go.
Yay, thank you.
I'm Kunal Jain, delegate for Region 3 at UNTHSC. What would I say? Would I say like I propose an amendment or?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, exactly. You'd say I'd like to propose an amendment on behalf of Region 3.
Okay, so I propose an amendment on behalf of Region 3.
Great. And so for an amendment, we actually need a second. So what will happen is we'll say, okay, the amendment's on the floor. Do we have a second? And then anyone would just say, anyone in the whole thing can just say second.
I will second, but I also want to remind that when we're in the virtual setting, all you're going to have to do is raise your hand on Zoom. But I will verbally second Kunal because he did an awesome job of volunteering.
Yes, thank you again. Okay, great. So we have a second. Okay, so let's move on to the next piece. So this is the amendment Kunal proposed. So he decided that he wanted to make Region 3 decided they want to make the resolution internal. And so when he's actually presenting that, it would be for an amendment. We would like to convert this resolution to an internal resolution. And then they would give their reasonings because we don't think that this is something the AMA should work on. We want the MSS to work on it. And just one more reminder, the amendments have to be submitted to the logistics committee, which we have information on, and we'll keep on reminding you guys as we go. But anyone can submit an amendment. So now the main motion, we're no longer voting on the resolution. We are voting on the amendment. So all we're talking about right now is just, do we want it to be internal or external? So anyone else want to be on the committee with Daniel and say you don't want the amendment? The reasoning for this one, I'll tell you guys, is that so CBH doesn't want it because they think it's out of scope. Because why should the MSS have an opinion on assisted outpatient treatment, right? So that's their reasoning. It should be the APA.
I'm going to speak as the author. This is Maddie Banerjee, author of the resolution, speaking in favor of the amendment because it's good to have policy on this, and that's what I believe. Therefore, I am speaking in support of this amendment.
All right, thank you, Maddie. Okay, we'll go on to the next one. All right, and then anyone want to be section delegates? I know we're running low on time, so if not, if we could have one more volunteer and I can kind of go through the others. One more brave soul. Rommel, do you want to talk again? Yeah.
You betcha. Ramel Morales, section delegate. Speaking on behalf of my section, Northeast Ohio Medical University. Speaking against the amendment, we wholeheartedly support the prior testimony of the CBH and therefore vote against this amendment. Thank you.
Great. And that's a good point. That's something great that Rommel did there. He said at the end, they also said that they disagreed with their amendment. Sometimes you give this long testimony and people need to hear just at the back, what do you want? What do you want again? Because they can get lost in it. So that was a really good thing you did there. Okay, so at this point, there's no further testimony. So everyone here is a delegate. So I want everyone to just do a reaction. Do you like the amendment? Do you think it should be internal, or do you think we should have policy on it just in case, like the author said? I see a few thumbs up. All right, it looks like the majority has it. We are the amendment passes. So what happens next? Does anyone want to tell me? Write in the chat or anything? In this one, the amendment passed, but in our fake one, it failed. So, and the reason it failed, and this generally, just a quick note, is the section delegates, they're the people that represent us in the big HOD. And so they often have a really powerful voice and the committee, so people are often likely to support them. But anyway, so in our case, the amendment fails, we go back to the original language. There's a bunch of different testimony for and against, and people decide, you know what, we don't know enough. We're going to refer to study because there's too much hesitancy. So we refer to study and it passes.
And I do want to just make note that, when you are extracting a resolution, you have to be really, really mindful and careful of what your intent and what the potential outcomes are. So for example, in this particular case, at the end of the day, this resolution was referred to study. But let's say, for example, you extract a resolution, there is a potential that that resolution will go with the will of the assembly and it will end in not adopt, which means that all of the work that the authors did on that resolution, all of the time that they spent, it's I don't want to say for naught because I'm sure there would be great lively debate, but at the end of the day, that resolution would go under not adopt, which means it's no longer part of our policy. It's not on the books anywhere. So whenever you are extracting something, be mindful, have conversations with important stakeholders throughout the section and with the section delegates, go to their office hours, which they hold, and make sure that you're bolstering yourself and making yourself ready for all potential outcomes.
Yes, and so that was a first order amendment. It was just one little piece of policy. If it's a second order, someone makes an amendment. So for example, last week at TextMed, there was a resolution to add physicians to a resolution. And then somebody wanted a second order amendment to say physicians and medical students. So that it included both. And that would be a second order amendment, if that makes sense. Okay, the real outcome, like I said, it was actually very similar to what we had here. It was referred to study, and the joint report is coming out. This is being heard at this conference, and it's a CGPH and CBH and C, or actually it was heard before at a different at the last conference, and it passed. And you can see in the next slide what happened, or the. So here you can see the report and what they did. So they actually, in reports generally flesh out the resolves a lot more and make it a lot more clear. And you can read all the reports too for the refer to studies. And they actually did make it internal. Since we only have a little bit of time, I think, we're going to stay in? Okay.
Yeah, I think because we're running a little bit short on time, like I said, we're going to share these slides with y'all, but I think we should spend a little bit of time just talking about what actually happens with these resolutions. What are the actions that are actually that come of them? So Natasha, I'm just going to go ahead to the in real life part. And if you want to go ahead and present that, and then I'll do the closing.
Sure. Yeah, so I would definitely recommend you guys going through some of these slides a little bit, and feel free to reach out to any of us. Like we said, we're going to have a group me for questions. You can also, I'll put my phone number on it too. You're welcome to text me if you want anything, have any questions about it, because we're more than willing to help. But one of the other things that we thought was really important was talking about how resolutions are acted on. This is something, again, that I also feel like people it's very nebulous. So what can happen is if it's actually the AMA, so it's not the MSO, your resolution, you decided it's an external resolution, you want the AMA to do something about it. So what can happen is it can be sent to the Board of Trustees, and that's a group that's dedicated to trying to figure out what to do with these resolutions and act on them. They often send letters. As you can see, I think at the bottom, they can write policy statements, and then the boards, committees, and councils can do similar things. So if it's a medical education resolution, it would be go to the Council of Medical Education. If it's there's all sorts of other different councils that can provide recommendations, and then there's also the advocacy office. If your resolution is something that's specifically related to advocacy, we can take advocacy action through the staff. Yep, and then you can actually, one of the things that I literally just learned about yesterday is in this tiny URL link, which you can get from the slides, there's an archive of all the actions taken on all the resolutions. So you can look up a resolution that passed before and you can see what they did, and it'll actually show you. And so you'll see on the next slide, if we want to go to it. So this was a resolution asking for veterans courts. So for veterans to have their own specific mental health courts rather than having to go through kind of the traditional justice system, more complicated than that. But in that link that I sent, you can actually search. So you'll look up support for veterans courts or the resolution number. You can see that it was adopted, and then you can see what they did. So in February 2020, they voiced their support through sending these letters. And you can see we was posted on our Facebook page, and here's the letter that was sent. And you can look this up for any resolution that you're curious about. So again, if there's a resolution you want a GC action item on, you can look and see what they've done already. And you can see, hey, nothing was done for 3 years. We need to do something about this again. And here's another one. This was an interesting one too, because it was an emergency resolution. It was something that was happening that we thought was urgent, and even though it wasn't submitted on time, the students agreed, the assembly agreed to hear it, to have the MSS hear it. It was asking for the Department of Homeland Security to not collect biologic data on people at the border. And you can see that the AMA took action on this, and you can read all about it here.
So for the sake of time, I'm just going to go a little bit ahead.
Yep.
Like I said, make sure that you check out the PowerPoint. We'll be sending it to you. There's more examples. If it's okay with you, Natasha, I think I'm going to skip the mastery check.
You're good.
But everyone close your eyes, don't look at the answers, test yourself later. And if you get the answer wrong, definitely go back to the cheat sheets and figure out why. Just want to share with you, these are more resources that you can utilize to kind of bolster the skills that you've learned here today. We do have an interactive module that was created by our speaker and vice speaker a few years ago that you can get at this bit.ly. Also, when we send you the PowerPoint, you can just click on the link that's hyperlinked right there. There's also an introductory video to parliamentary procedure that Daniel and I created sometime last year that you can utilize that will kind of refresh the basics that we went over in this particular meeting in case you forgot for whatever reason. We also have a quick sheet as well as the workshop support document that we kind of advertised at the beginning of the session. But as of right now, I would really love to answer any questions that anyone has. Feel free to either unmute yourself and ask or type it in the chat. I'll give you like a minute or so to do that. And if not, we'll go ahead and move along. But please, 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 if you have any questions, we're all here, and like you honestly have such a great like team here to answer your questions. Natasha has been heavily involved in things with the MSS for a while. Rachel used to be a vice speaker. Like, we are all people who are here to help you. So please, if you have questions, now is the most opportune time for you to ask them. So there is a question about whether the recording will be sent out. I don't know off the top of my head, but Sarah, okay, perfect, Sarah, it will be posted to the June 21 meeting page. So if for whatever reason you missed out or you want to share it with your chapter for more information or education for them, definitely please do so. Any other questions that we could answer for anyone?
Anything else that was confusing, that didn't make sense, you want to learn more about?
While you're thinking about it, I just want to put a plug in, like Daniel mentioned earlier in the chat. We do have that post-meeting survey, which would be super beneficial, not only for us, but also for you and the rest of our section. Let us know if there's anything that you still felt confused about, anything that you wish we could spend a little bit more time on, or maybe do like a breakout session with. And just a reminder, if you are especially a delegate or an alternate delegate, make sure that you register for the meeting. The deadline is May 23rd, 11:59 p.m. Central. You can use the bit.ly link that's here in the presentation to register. If you are a delegate or an alternate delegate for your chapter, you will be receiving a follow-up email that will give you information on how to become credentialed. It's super important that you get credentialed as a delegate or an alternate delegate, because if you're not credentialed, you won't be able to vote. And if you don't vote, you don't have a voice. And that's why we all come to these meetings, so that we can have a voice, we can vote, and we can enact the will of the section. So please, 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 make sure you register on time. We won't be able to accommodate you if you don't. So if you have any questions or issues, definitely reach out to myself and Daniel, our vice speaker, sooner rather than later, so we can assist you in whatever way possible. Do note that the credentialing deadline is a few days after registration. You will get that follow-up email, so be sure that you're looking out for it. And then that's pretty much all we have for you. We do have some resource slides at the end. If you have any questions about registration and credentialing, like I said, reach out to myself or Daniel. You can also reach out to AMA staff. at the email listed here. We're super excited that you guys were able to come to this session. We hope that it was helpful. We hope that you learned some stuff. And we're super excited to see you practice your Parli-Pro skills at June 21. That being said, we do have a ton of resources that Natasha was fabulous enough to put together for y'all. So make sure that you take this PowerPoint, use these links. It'll give you everything that you need and more to be a pro. And I don't know if anyone else has closing words, but again, thank you so much for coming. We hope this was very, very helpful for you.